What if the key to aerial supremacy wasn't speed or grace, but sheer stubbornness? By 1941, as nimble Zeros rewrote the rules of air combat, one fighter stood defiant. Welcome to Historical Digs. For today, we uncover the unlikely story of the P-40 Warhawk, a machine too slow to chase, too heavy to dance, and too tough to die. The underdog's anatomy. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk arrived in the Pacific Theater like a heavyweight boxer stepping into a knife fight. By 1941, aerial combat had become a ballet of speed and agility, dominated by Japan's Mitsubishi A6M0, a fighter so nimble it could pivot midair like a dragonfly. The Warhawk, in contrast, flew with the grace of a freight train. Its 1,150 horsepower Allison V1710 engine, optimized for low-altitude performance, gasped above 15,000 feet. Its top speed of 360 miles per hour gave it a slight edge on paper, but in a turning fight, that advantage vanished. Even its armament, 250 cals in the nose and 430 cals in the wings, felt excessive, like bringing a cannon to a fencing match. Yet hidden beneath its brutish exterior lay a survivalist's blueprint. Curtiss engineers, led by Donovan Berlin, had engineered the P-40 not to outfly its enemies, but to outlast them. Every design choice screamed pragmatism. The cockpit was surrounded by armor plating and bulletproof glass, a luxury Zero pilots could only envy. Self-sealing fuel tanks layered with vulcanized rubber and laminated fabric could plug bullet holes mid-flight. Even its engine and cooling systems were armored, designed to absorb damage that would down lighter fighters. The Warhawk's airframe was a study in over-engineering. Its wings, built around a boxbar design, could endure 7.5 Gs without buckling. Landing gear struts, forged from solid steel, absorbed impacts that would snap a Zero's spindly legs. Test pilots at Wright Field reportedly noted that the P-40's controls required a schoolteacher's patience and a lumberjack's grip, but its stability in a dive bordered on supernatural. In 1941 trials, a Warhawk plunged from 25,000 feet at 480 miles per hour, its wings quivering but intact, a feat that must have left engineers at Mitsubishi shaking their heads. The Zero's designers had stripped away every ounce of redundancy in pursuit of lightness. The P-40 did the opposite. The P-40's fuselage used reinforced spars and internal supports that added weight but improved survivability. In stateside training exercises, P-40s earned a reputation for resilience. In 1941, Wright Field tests reportedly included simulated collision scenarios to test wing durability. One account claimed a P-40 emerged from an encounter with a steel test rig sporting a dented wing, but an intact spar. If true, it underscored just how overbuilt the Warhawk really was. Before we dive deeper into the P-40 Warhawk story, hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Digs. Your support helps us unearth the untold stories of aviation's most battle-hardened war machines. But raw toughness alone couldn't compensate for the Allison engine's flaws. While the Zero's Nakajima Sakai performed well at combat altitudes, the V1710 struggled above 15,000 feet. Without a two-stage supercharger, the V1710 lost critical power at high altitude, leaving the P-40 sluggish and vulnerable. Pilots grumbled that climbing in a P-40 felt like hauling bricks up a ladder. Yet this weakness hid a perverse strength. By 1941, most Pacific dogfights occurred below 15,000 feet, exactly where the Allison's torque-rich power band peaked. The Warhawk had higher diving and level flight speeds at low altitude than the Zero, its engine roaring like a Midwest harvest combine. The Flying Tigers discovered this duality firsthand. Chennault saw something different in the P-40, a tough, well-armored brute that could survive where others couldn't. He reportedly quipped that the P-40 wasn't built to dance, but to take a punch and throw one back. The sentiment captured his entire doctrine: win by toughness, not twirls. His pilots soon learned the Warhawk's quirks. The rudder required heavy foot pressure, but once banked, the plane tracked like a railgun. The 6 guns, synchronized to converge between 250 to 300 yards, turned strafing runs into steel typhoons. And that armor, one account claims Ed Rector's Warhawk came back with dozens of bullet holes and not a scratch on him. Critics dismissed the P-40 as a flying anvil, but its heft became its shield. Eric Schilling, a test pilot who flew both captured Zeros and Warhawks, once compared the Zero to a scalpel and the P-40 to a crowbar. Brutal, unrefined, but effective. By 1942, the Warhawk's reputation for indestructibility bordered on myth. The Zero, for all its elegance, had no answer to the kind of abuse the Warhawk was capable of. Its paper-thin skin and unarmored fuel tanks turned every engagement into a death gamble. The P-40 wasn't just a plane, it was a philosophy. In a theater where supply lines stretched across oceans and replacement parts were rarer than hen's teeth, durability became currency. While Zeros handled tropical humidity and coral dust quite poorly, the Warhawk's steel bones shrugged off rot. Its simplicity became a virtue. Even novice mechanics could troubleshoot its systems with a wrench and a flashlight. By the time the Allies deployed faster, sleeker fighters in 1944, the P-40 had already cemented its legacy. It was the underdog that refused to play by the rules, a machine that turned its flaws into weapons and its critics into converts. But survival wasn't enough. To win, the P-40 needed to rewrite the rulebook. Chennault's chess move. Claire Chennault didn't just see the P-40's flaws, he weaponized them. A grizzled Texan with a pilot's reflexes and a tactician's mind, Chennault had spent years studying Japanese air tactics as a military advisor in China. By 1940, Chennault had observed that Japanese pilots relied on tight acrobatic dogfights, a trait that would carry over into their use of the new Zero. What they hadn't faced was a commander willing to turn physics itself into a trap. When Chennault took command of the American volunteer group, the legendary Flying Tigers, in 1941, he inherited a ragtag fleet of P-40Bs and pilots greener than jungle canopy. Most had never fired a gun in combat. His solution? A tactical playbook as unorthodox as it was brutal, with highlights such as never turn with a Zero and hit them where they're blind, straight down. The strategy hinged on two truths. First, the P-40's Allison engine, while sluggish in a climb, produced relentless torque at low altitudes, enabling blistering dive speeds. Second, the Zero's lightweight airframe, optimized for agility, couldn't withstand high-speed stress. Chennault's pilots drilled relentlessly in what later came to be called boom and zoom tactics, ambushing from altitude, striking in a single pass, and using the Warhawk's momentum to escape before the enemy could react. On December 20th, 1941, over Kunming, China, the plan faced its first test. Radarless and outnumbered, the Flying Tigers relied on Chennault's early warning network, a chain of Chinese observers who telephoned reports of incoming Japanese bombers. 10 P-40s climbed to 18,000 feet, hiding in the sun's glare. Below them, 10 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers droned toward the city, unescorted and unaware. At Chennault's order, the Warhawks tipped into near-vertical dives. The Allison screamed as airspeed needles kissed 480 miles per hour, a velocity no Japanese plane could safely match. As R.T. Smith described it, the Japanese gunners couldn't track the Warhawks during their steep dives. In his words, they never saw it coming. The AVG's high-speed tactics turned the sky into a killing ground. The 50 caliber slugs tore through unarmored fuel tanks, igniting bombers mid-air. In minutes, 6 Bettys spiraled into the rice paddies. The surviving 4 jettisoned payloads and fled. Not a single P-40 was lost. The victory wasn't luck, it was geometry. Chennault had calculated that diving from a 45-degree angle gave his pilots a slight accuracy boost, as the P-40's nose-mounted guns aligned perfectly with a bomber's wingspan. He also banned deflection shooting, aiming ahead of a moving target, insisting his men close to 300 yards, point-blank range, to maximize damage. Japanese commanders initially dismissed the attacks as flukes, but by February 1942, the Flying Tigers had tallied 299 confirmed kills, with P-40 loss rates significantly lower than Allied squadrons using traditional tactics. The Zero's pilots, trained for elegant duels, grew baffled. One Japanese crewman lamented that the AVG struck like hawks, then vanished, a tactic few Japanese pilots could counter. Chennault's brilliance lay in leveraging asymmetry. While Japanese doctrine prized honor and individual skill, he built a system. He mandated 2-hour debriefs after every sortie, dissecting gun camera footage and fuel consumption logs. Pilots memorized the Zero's blind spots, its feeble rear armor, its inability to roll left as swiftly as right, its carburetor stall during negative G maneuvers. As Chennault often preached, fight the plane, not the pilot. The P-40's ruggedness amplified these tactics. During a raid on Rangoon, Charlie Bond's Warhawk took a 20mm shell to the radiator. Instead of bailing, he nursed the smoking plane 200 miles home, exploiting the Allison's tolerance for overheating, a feat no Zero could survive. Chennault's men also learned to exploit the P-40's weight in collisions. By mid-1942, Chennault's tactics had rewritten Pacific air combat. Chennault's tactical doctrines were later studied by U.S. units across the Pacific. Japanese pilots, frustrated by Chennault's tactics, began avoiding head-on engagements. Yet Chennault's greatest victory was psychological. He proved that in war, creativity trumps specs, and that even an obsolete fighter could become a predator with the right mind at the yoke. The bulletproof classroom. The P-40 Warhawk didn't just fight the enemy, it schooled its own pilots. By 1942, the Pacific chewed up rookie aviators like sugarcane. Some replacement pilots arrived with barely 100 flight hours, most of it in docile AT-6 Texans. Their baptism by fire came in a cockpit built for survivors. The Warhawk's forgiving nature masked its flaws. Its wide-track landing gear tolerated botched approaches on primitive airstrips, while its stable gun platform turned panicked sprays into lethal salvos. AVG ace Charles Older, who scored 10 kills in the P-40, believed it gave rookies a chance to survive their mistakes, unlike the fragile Zero. The armor plating that shielded pilots also calmed nerves. Novices quickly learned they could soak punishment while learning to shoot straight. Chennault formalized this trial-by-fire curriculum. His pilots drilled in pairs, a veteran leading a rookie, using hand signals when radios failed. Trainees practiced deflection shooting on towed sleds over the Burmese jungle, their 50 cals loaded with tracer rounds for instant feedback. The Warhawk's weight became a teaching tool. Its inertia forced rookies to plan maneuvers seconds ahead, a discipline that saved lives against quicker foes. But the classroom had no walls. Over Rangoon, 21-year-old John Wong, a Chinese-American volunteer, discovered his P-40's durability mid-combat. One story tells how Wong escaped a Zero by diving into a cloud, returning with a shot at plane and a lesson in guts. Whether or not Chennault promoted him that day, the tale captures the spirit of AVG improvisation. Mechanics turned the Warhawk into a lab experiment. At Kunming, crews bolted 250-pound bombs to makeshift wing racks, jury-rigged from B-25 parts, creating the Pacific's first fighter bombers. Pilots and mechanics developed their own slang. In the jungles of Yunnan, skidding on a blown tailwheel became so common it earned nicknames, while field crews jokingly called their patch job Curtiss stitching, a nod to the riveted metal panels that kept bullet-riddled Warhawks flying. Even the Japanese unwittingly contributed to the curriculum. After downing a Zero near Lashio, mechanics recovered its intact Sakai engine. Side-by-side comparisons with the Allison revealed a perverse truth. The Warhawk's obsolete power plant tolerated sand, humidity, and amateur maintenance, flaws that kept it flying when pristine Zeros were grounded. By 1943, the P-40's graduates filled Allied squadrons. Their textbooks, dented armor plates, patched wings, and the unspoken rule etched into every rivet: survive first, shoot later. The cockroach of the Pacific. By 1943, the P-40 Warhawk had shed its fighter-pilot pretensions. Outclassed by newer fighters, the P-40 carved out a second life as a rugged ground attacker and patrol fighter, strapping bombs to its wings and flying in skies few dared to enter. To some crews, the P-40 was like a cockroach. It thrived in impossible conditions and refused to die. In New Guinea's jungles, where airstrips were a little more than rough mats of crushed coral, the Warhawk's brute strength became legend. One story from the 49th Fighter Group describes a field repair using a soup can and soldering iron. "We patched with whatever we had," one crew chief recalled. The Warhawk's Allison engine, though wheezy at altitude, gulped down low-octane fuel that choked other fighters. At Milne Bay, where humidity rotted control cables, mechanics resorted to jungle improvisation, using whatever was at hand to keep Warhawks operational. Pilots must have joked about Curtiss air conditioning as they roasted in cockpits, but the plane's steel frame endured. Japanese pilots, once dismissive, learned to dread its tenacity. During a 1943 raid on Wewak, Zeros ambushed a P-40 squadron at dawn. Outnumbered 3-1, the Warhawks dove into a river valley, skimming treetops to lure pursuers into a fatal game of chicken. 3 Zeros clipped trees and crashed, while Warhawks escaped, damaged but alive. By year's end, the cockroach had earned its stripes. It couldn't climb, couldn't dance, but in a theater where survival was the only victory that mattered, the P-40 wrote its epitaph in coral dust and bullet scars. The P-40 Warhawk never escaped its flaws. By 1945, it was scrapped for parts, its shark's teeth rusting in junkyards. Yet in those pivotal early years, it did the impossible. It turned obsolescence into opportunity, desperation into doctrine, and steel-plated grit into legend. So, was the P-40 a masterclass in adaptation, or just a stopgap that got lucky? Let us know in the comments. And hit that bell to join us on the next historical dig. Until then, remember, history is full of hidden gems if you know where to dig.